The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, addressed by Swamiji to the residents of Madurai in 1897, Part 1. I wish I could live in your midst for several days and fulfill the conditions that have just been pointed out by your most worthy chairman of relating to you my experiences in the West and the result of all my labors there for the past 4 years. But unfortunately, even Swamis have bodies, and the continuous traveling and speaking that I've had to undergo for the last 3 weeks make it impossible for me to deliver a very long speech this evening. I will therefore satisfy myself with thanking you very cordially for the kindness that has been shown to me and reserve other things for some day in the future when, under better conditions of health, we shall have the time to talk over various subjects than we can do in a short time this evening. Being in Madura as the guest of one of your well-known citizens and noblemen, the Raja of Ramanad, one fact comes prominently to my mind. Perhaps most of you are aware that it was the Raja who first put the idea into my mind of going to Chicago, and it was he who all the time supported it with all his heart and influence. A good deal of the praise that has been bestowed upon me in this address ought to go to this nobleman of southern India. I only wish that instead of becoming a Raja, he had become a sannyasi, for that is what he is really fit for. Whatever there is in a thing really needed in one part of the world, the complement will find its way there and supply it with new life. This is true in the physical world as well as in the spiritual. If there was a want of spirituality in one part of the world, and at the same time that spirituality exists elsewhere, whether we consciously struggle for it or not, that spirituality will find its way to the part where it is needed and balance the inequity. In the history of the human race, not once or twice, but again and again, it has been the destiny of India in the past to supply spirituality to the world. We find that whenever either by mighty conquest or by commercial supremacy, different parts of the world have been kneaded into one whole race, and bequests have been made from one corner to another, each nation, as it were, poured forth its own quota, either political, social, or spiritual. India's contribution to the sum total of human knowledge has been spirituality, philosophy. These she contributed even long before the rising of the Persian Empire, for the third time during the ascendancy of the Greeks, and now for the fourth time during the ascendancy of the English. She is going to fulfill the same destiny once more. As Western ideas of organization and external civilization are penetrating and pouring into our country, whether we will have them or not, so Indian spirituality and philosophy are deluging the lands of the West. None can resist it. And no more can we resist some sort of material civilization from the West. A little of it perhaps is good for us, and a little spiritualization is good for the West. Thus, the balance will be preserved. It is not that we ought to learn everything from the West, or that they have to learn everything from us, but each will have to supply and hand down to future generations what it has for the future accomplishment of that dream of ages, the harmony of nations, an ideal world. Whether that ideal world will ever come, I do not know. Whether that social perfection will ever be reached, I have my own doubts. Whether it will comes or not, each one of us will have to work for the idea as if it will come tomorrow and as if it will only depends on his work and his alone. Each one of us will have to believe that everyone else in the world has done his work, and the only work remaining to be done to make the world perfect has to be done by himself. This is the responsibility we have taken upon ourselves. In the meanwhile, in India there is a tremendous revival of religion. There is a danger ahead as well as glory, for revival sometimes breeds fanaticism, sometimes goes to the extreme, so that often it is not even in the power of those who start the revival to control it when it has gone beyond a certain length. It is better therefore to be forewarned. We have to find our way between the skilla of the old superstitious orthodoxy and the sharpness of materialism, of Europeanism, of soulless, of the so-called reform, which has penetrated to the foundation of Western progress. These two have to be taken care of. In the first place, we cannot become Western. Therefore, imitating the Westerns is useless. Suppose you can imitate the Westerns. That moment you will die. You will have no more life in you. In the second place, it is impossible. A stream is taken, its rise, away beyond where time began, flowing through millions of ages of human history. Do you mean to get hold of that stream and push it back to its source, to the Himalayan glacier? Even if that were practicable, it would not be possible for you to be Europeanized. If you find it impossible for the European to throw off the few centuries of culture which there is in the West, do you think it is possible for you to throw off the culture of shining scores of centuries? It cannot be. We must also remember that in every village god and every little superstition, custom is that which we are accustomed to call our religious faith. But local customs are infinite and contradictory. Which are we to obey and which not to obey? The Brahmin of southern India, for instance, would shrink in horror at the sight of another Brahmin eating meat. A Brahmin in northern India thinks it is a most glorious and holy thing to do. He kills goats by the hundred in sacrifice. If you put forward your custom, they are equally ready with theirs. Various are the customs all over India, but they are local. The greatest mistake made is that ignorant people always think that this local custom is the essence of our religion.